I posted a video recently about sleeping customs in the Middle Ages, and it sparked quite a few questions. The video dealt with the fact that sleeping was often more communal in the Middle Ages. You might have many people sleeping in one room. Peasant families often shared a bed. But the question that kept coming up in the comments section was, did married couples have privacy while they were sleeping? So with this video, I want to focus on the aristocrats, the knightly elite, the warrior caste that ruled Europe. For the aristocracy, a marriage required two things: a house and a bed. There was no house without a marriage, and there was no marriage without a house. At the center of every household was a single married couple. Children had to leave when they married. The knights, retained by a lord, would leave as well when they married. A lord would seek to provide his children and his knights with a house of their own, lands of their own, so that they could support a marriage. A noble house had public and private portions. The great hall was the public sphere. This is where the lord would display his power. And the chamber contained the bed. This was a place of retreat. This basic division expanded to include more rooms over the course of the High Middle Ages. So what I'd like to do now is read to you guys a description. This is from 1127, and this is a typical fortified aristocratic house from this period. On the ground floor were the cellars and granaries, the coffers, the barrels, and jars. The second story included the habitation, where the household assembled. That is, the hall, where meetings were held and meals eaten. This was flanked by small rooms reserved for use by the pantler and the cupbearer. Then came the great chamber, where the sire and his lady slept, adjoining a room used as a dormitory by the servants and children. Part of the great chamber was a place where a fire could be built at dawn or in the evening for the sick or for bleedings, or to warm the servants and children. On the same level, but set apart from the house proper, was the kitchen. The kitchen occupied a separate two-story building. Beneath the kitchen proper, which contained the hearth, were a pigsty and chicken coops. The kitchen was linked by a passageway to the dining hall. Above the master's bedchamber, upper chambers had been built. In one, the lord's son slept, if they wished. In the other, his daughters slept, watched over by guards, whose guard rooms stood nearby. A corridor led from the habitation to the lodge, a place for relaxation and private conversation, and from there to the chapel. Alright, so this description comes to us from well into the 12th century. You can see this ever-expanding layout based around the core of the Great Hall and the chamber. So the chamber has another room attached to it that's reached through a corridor. This is just kind of a place to hang out. This is kind of an extension of the chamber. There are two extra rooms attached to the chamber for the sons and daughters to sleep in, respectively. And then down in the Great Hall, you've got these little side rooms, which are places to pour drinks, prepare things while the Lord is holding his great feasts and displaying his generosity. The heart of the house was the bedchamber, and at the center of the bedchamber was the marital bed. This was reserved for the Lord and his lady. The bedchamber was a place of privacy for the family, but not solitude. The marital bed itself was enclosed by bed hangings or curtains, but other members of the Lord and the lady's inner circle would have slept in this bedchamber. For example, the wife's ladies. These would have been aristocratic women who were unmarried at this point, who served the wife, and these could have been her sisters, her relatives. They could have been female relatives of her husband. At times, male relatives may have slept in the bedchamber as well, especially if they were traveling. Maybe even some of the Lord's closest retainer knights. These people would have been sleeping in smaller beds, mattresses at different parts of the chamber. So I think the thing we have to remember here is that medieval people just had a very different idea of privacy. And of course, the question that inspired this video: how did people make love? Did the Lord and lady make love at certain times alone in that bed when others were not present? Were the bed hangings around the bed, was that considered sufficient privacy? We just don't know. These are details we don't have. But again, we just have to remember that the way they thought of privacy was just different than we do today. One thing I think it's helpful to remember too is that medieval aristocrats loved the outdoors. They loved to go out on hunting expeditions. Medieval people didn't like to be cooped up inside. And in fact, the outdoors were a place where they would go for solitude. Poetry describes orchards as places of solitude. So orchards, these vast artificial forests, these were places where medieval people would go to be alone, according to poetry. These were also places where clandestine lovers could meet. So I think that's about as much as we can know in terms of how much privacy the bedchamber would have provided to medieval married couples. The truth is that bedchambers were not places of solitude the way we think of them today. They were places where the family could retreat. But medieval people were much more communal in their thinking. In fact, solitude itself, if you think about it, it was kind of a dangerous thing. It was kind of associated with exile, being outside the law. Medieval people had a sense of their position, their status coming from their particular group. And thinking about a great lord, like why some of his retainer knights might have slept in his bedchamber. Protection. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm going to provide at the end a list of my sources. There are some really good books you guys can check out if you want to learn more about this topic.